Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse. Before we get into the episode, Bet Online continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, Bet Online is the ultimate game day companion with the largest selection of odds on everything from football to NBA, college basketball to NHL and UFC. BetOnline is the number one sports betting source for the year. From touchdowns to three-pointers and hat tricks, BetOnline has you covered on every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, so getting into the episode, you will notice that I am today. Well, first of all, before I begin, happy MLK Day. I'm recording this on MLK Day, even though I will be releasing tomorrow on Tuesday, so a day after. So I'll start with that. For anybody who was watching the YouTube version of this episode, you will notice that I'm wearing blue. In part, this is due to it being cold, and that's the main reason. But I also could justify it today, given the news that we heard about Anthony Santander heading to the Blue Jays. Now, prior to the news breaking that Santander and the Blue Jays had a deal, I was planning to do a check-in episode on Anthony Santander's offseason, just to sort of assess where he was at, try to give my thoughts about what was going on, why he hasn't signed yet, because he is such a uh, big part of the Orioles organization. It felt appropriate to do a check-in episode on him, despite the very low odds at the time that he was coming back to the Orioles. Now, fortunately, news broke that him and the Blue Jays have signed a deal that will send him to Toronto for the foreseeable future, the next 5, 6 years, potentially. He will be a Toronto Blue Jay. Now, this is probably disappointing to a lot of Oriole fans. I think that most Oriole fans didn't have realistic expectations of bringing Anthony Santander back to the Orioles. I think that most Oriole fans probably knew early in the offseason that he was not returning. I felt very confident in that. And then once the Orioles signed Tyler O'Neill, that even more solidified his fate, that he was not going to be returning in the black and orange in 2025. So, what's happened and what has emerged is that Anthony Santander instead will be going to our division rivals, the Toronto Blue Jays. Now, you can look at this in a couple ways. On one hand, it is a pretty good deal, I think, for Anthony Santander, so we can be happy for him. On the other bright side, we will have a decent number of games against the Toronto Blue Jays. So he's not going to the Rockies, for instance, where we're never really going to get to watch him play anymore. He's going to stay close to home. Potentially, if the Blue Jays have a good season in the next few years, we might even be able to see him in the playoffs again, as we did last year. So, and the year before. So, um, yeah, so that's the positives of the Anthony Santander deal for the Oriole fans. The negatives, of course, is that he is going to a division rival. The negatives is he is going to be a bit of a problem for our pitchers when we go to play the Toronto Blue Jays. And he's going to be frustratingly contributing to a team that Oriole fans in general don't really like and don't have a lot of support for. So that is the negatives and the negative consequences of this deal. I think from Oriole fans, despite the silver linings, I think most significantly, it didn't really matter as much. Maybe if he went to the Red Sox or the Yankees, it would have been even more heartbreaking for Oriole fans, given that he has, up until this point, up until today, been an all-time Oriole for the duration of his career. It might have stung a little bit more had he gone to Yankees, Red Sox, and it might sting for Oriole fans for him to be going to the Blue Jays. That definitely is a reasonable and sort of acceptable sort of reaction to have. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem as if Elias ever really demonstrated any interest in bringing Anthony Santander back. So he was going to go elsewhere, and that's sort of where things sort of ended up. That's what ended up happening. And probably for Oriole fans, it's more significant, at least it is for me, that he is not an Oriole more so than whatever team he ended up on, right? It's more significant whether he's an Oriole or a non-Oriole than if he's a non-Oriole, well, where does he end up and what team is he representing and playing for? So the Oriole non-Oriole thing in my mind is the bigger question and the one that I am more interested and care more about than where he ended up. Um, so overall, though, yeah, I would say that there is a pretty sizable list of teams that I would have, in an ideal situation, preferred for him to go to. Of course, I do care first and foremost about it being a deal that he's happy with and him gonna like uh be playing for a team that he's excited to play for and living somewhere he's excited about living, et cetera, et cetera. So that's of course my first concern. But very, very, very secondarily to that is just I would prefer him to be on probably a different team rather than the Blue Jays if I could have had my pick entirely. So that's sort of the situation. So I won't be getting into a lot about sort of what Anthony Santander has done his time here for the Orioles. I think that it is pretty obvious and that Oriole fans are pretty aware of his contribution. It all started with the Orioles Rule 5 draft pick, where we got Anthony Santander from Cleveland back in 2016. And that really is probably amongst the biggest Rule 5 uh, picks in recent history, definitely in Orioles' recent history. So it was extremely, extremely significant that the Orioles were able to make that selection, uh, and even more than make that selection, but end up keeping him around. A lot of Rule 5 draft picks end up returning to their original clubs because things don't work out with them staying on the 40-man roster for the extended period of time. But Anthony Santander, as we all know, did a lot more than that and is definitely, I will always remember him as a Rule 5 draft pick because I do think that is a pretty significant point in his career. And it does say something sort of about the trajectory that an organization or a club expects certain players to be, uh, I guess, on track for what their expected trajectory is um, when somebody is picked up as a Rule 5 selection. Now, a lot of times, like clubs can't always keep every single player that they want to keep, but they definitely will try to do things to make sure that the players they really, really like don't end up getting selected in the Rule 5 draft. And yeah, the Orioles ended up getting Santander through this Rule 5 draft, and he ended up having a stellar career with the Orioles. And he was a upper tier free agent this offseason. So Yeah, out of a Rule 5 draft pick, that is pretty unprecedented. It doesn't happen a lot. It's not a common thing. So there's a lot of significance there. And also he had been prior to going to the Blue Jays, had been the Oriole that was on the Orioles in the organization for the longest period of time, active player on the team for the longest period of time. So that is also a really, really significant thing, especially in this era where players and organizations don't end up matching for that long, and guys move around, guys get traded, guys get dealt, guys sign elsewhere, etc. And that's, of course, signing elsewhere is why the relationship between the Orioles and him ended as it did. But the fact that he was able to stick around so long, the fact that he did not get sent back and returned as the Rule 5 draft pick, all are pretty speak to what the Orioles organization did to sort of accelerate and advance his career, and also to him finding it in those years where he became an Oriole. So the deal is a pretty good deal, I think, for him, all things considered. So very early in the offseason, he had sort of put out there that he wanted a 5-year, $100 million deal. I think there was a lot of questions throughout baseball whether that would actually happen for him. That was his more or less asking price. But I always sort of wondered and sort of felt whether that would have to be moderated a bit as time went on. And the deal ended up being 5 years and $92.5 million dollars. So that is guaranteed 5 years, $92.5 million. So it's just $7.5 million shy of the 100 million that he was looking for. This deal is a little bit more complicated than just that. However, he does have an opt-out clause after 3 years. And apparently there's a situation where if he decides to opt out of the contract after 3 years, Santander does not actually have the final say as to whether that happens, and the Blue Jays can then trigger a sixth year on his deal that would then get the total value of the deal up to $110 million over 6 years. There is also apparently some incentives in there. The $92.5 million is also a bit complicated because some of that money is deferred. It is backloaded. The contract is overall backloaded, just meaning that most of the payments are towards the end of the contract, more towards the beginning. So the first few years, he'll make less than he does toward the end of the contract. So those things are all very, sort of significant details of the contract. Some of, obviously, not every single detail of it has come out yet. But overall, that's sort of the framework for the deal. So as far as it being what Santander was hoping for, it's probably a little less than what he was hoping for. It's probably not exactly what he wanted. However, he did end up getting the 5 years that he wanted. He got close to his $100 million mark over the course of those 5 years, and he might make a little bit more than 100 million over 6 years, 110 over six. So all in all, I think it's not a bad deal for him. I think it also makes a lot of sense for the Blue Jays, who have had a really rough offseason so far, losing out on bidding wars for certain high profile free agents. They might not, who knows? Maybe it's possible they didn't even lose the bidding war, but players just ended up not signing with the Blue Jays because they're the Blue Jays. In all likelihood, though, that's probably not the situation, and they did get outbid on a lot of players. But overall, they've had a really rough and quiet offseason. Even the Orioles offseason, which hasn't felt that exciting so far, has, sort of been more eventful than the Blue Jays has. So they've had a really rough offseason, and this was a pretty significant signing for them. And for from their perspective, I think the deal does make sense. I do sort of one interesting detail about the situation. I did sort of mention this, but then sort of passed over what I think is the significance of it. Yeah, so it does have this opt-out clause after 3 years for Santander. And I think it's a really interesting inclusion in the contract for him. Now, I could see Anthony Santander being a sort of Nelson Cruz-esque player and hitting, just being one of those guys that hits really late into his career, especially with his defensive value. I think, and as he gets older in his career, he's going to have to worry less about playing defense as much. He's probably going to DH more as he ages, which in a way could be positive for him because he just has to focus on hitting and the bat. So I could definitely see Anthony Santander being one of these guys that just finds a way to hit late into their career and just sort of being more or less a machine offensively, putting up home runs, putting up bombs. I could see that for him moving forward. Like, I don't know for sure. I'm not saying that will happen, but I definitely think it's within the realm of possibility. What I think is interesting about the inclusion of the opt-out clause is that, yeah, this will be around his age 33 when he's going to have this option to opt out. And at that point in time, maybe like I was saying, if he is sort of this guy that I'm saying he might be poised to get a better deal in 3 years, and go sort of capitalize on that. However, with that said, I do think that um, sort of with who he is, with his skill set, I think the fact that he just had a career year and hit 44 home runs, which he's never done before, he's never hit 40 before. The fact that he just was coming off a career year, this is sort of where you would expect he's going to try to take full advantage of, try to get as much as possible, um, and it would appear to me unlikely that in 3 years, no matter how he does over the first 3 years of this deal, it would feel unlikely that he would be in a better position to then go make more money at that point in time. Now, this opt out clause, maybe it is maybe the AAV didn't have to decline that much because of this option that the Blue Jays have to extend his contract and keep him even if he triggers the opt out clause. But with that said, it's interesting that Anthony Santander, that this is included at all in the deal, given that it's hard to see a situation where in a few years he's in a better position to hit free agency and get another giant contract at the age of 33. So I don't know. Opt out clauses are becoming increasingly common in Major League Baseball. So maybe this is sort of indicative of it is just the normal standard operating procedure uh, for how contracts in this day and age of baseball, especially for players as good as Anthony Santander, are constructed. But with that said, it is a little interesting to see. that be included in the deal, and it will be interesting to see whether he actually feels like at that point in time he just tears it up the next 3 years, has incredible seasons, maybe even increases the walk rate or whatever he does, hits more home runs or hits 35 plus home runs the next 3 years and feels like he's even in a better position. Maybe all those things will happen, but it's interesting that that provision was included because it's just hard to see a situation where, at least for me, he's going to be in a better position to get a better contract at age 33 than he is right now coming off a career year. So that was a little surprising, and I do wonder what the contract would have looked like if Santander had said, "Look, you know what? I don't want the opt-out clause after 3 years. Just, can you give me a few, extra $1 million, what that would look like?" I don't know. I'm not in the negotiating room. I'm sure that him and his agents are making, wise, calculated decisions. So I'm not second guessing anything here, but I was just a little interested, I guess I would say, into that opt-out clause and what's going to happen from it, and why that was sort of included in the deal. So I think that was sort of an interesting facet of the deal. I mean, potentially, maybe that was what the Blue Jays did to not give him 100 million. They said, "Look, we don't want to pay you, exactly what you're asking for over 5 years, but what we'll do is we'll give you this opt out." And maybe that was sort of what put it over the edge for him, or maybe that was sort of a consolation that the Blue Jays gave. So again, I wasn't in the negotiating room, but yeah, I did find that sort of interesting. And I do think it is in some part a reflection of just how much more common opt-out clauses are becoming in Major League Baseball. So overall, I'm not excited to seeing Anthony Santander be playing against us. Um, yeah, really not looking forward to that. I do hope that he does really well for the Blue Jays. I hope that he finishes his career really strong. I know we're still a long way away from that. I'm sort of saying, oh, I hope he, puts in a good last couple years and finishes his career strong. No, he still has hopefully the second half of his career to look forward to. Um, but overall, there is like it's going to be sad that he's going to be gone because he has been with us for so long. It really felt like he was a fixture in the Orioles organization, and he was a really, really big contributor to this Orioles team for a long time. He did struggle with injury issues, but overall, he was extremely, extremely consistent during the course of his time with the Orioles. And yeah, from by all accounts, he seems like a good clubhouse guy. Seems like someone that I, would want to be around for sure. And it's sort of disappointing that how things ended in the playoffs. Of course, we all remember the time when he came up with the bases loaded and popped out, and that was really upsetting and sort of the last big moment that he had on the Orioles where he sort of didn't get the job done and hoped he hoped he had done better. We all hoped he had done better. But overall, he's been a really important piece for this Orioles organization. And I think I can speak for a lot of Oriole fans by saying that we are going to miss him. So, best of luck to Anthony Santander in the future. Especially best of luck when you're not playing the Orioles and you're not hitting against the Baltimore Orioles. But overall, I'm happy for him. Um, yeah, I'm happy for him. And, it's sad that this is sort of what the business side of baseball does. It would have been great if Anthony Santander had been able to have been an all-time Oriole. I would have loved that. I think a lot of Oriole fans would have loved that. And that does not happen much at all in Major League Baseball now. It's much less common than it used to be. And that's kind of disappointing. And that is sort of yeah, how things go in this day and age of baseball. A lot of fans get attached to players and then they end up leaving, and that's just sort of how baseball is right now, unfortunately. um uh, Oriole fans, I mean, there is potentially some frustration that you can have with Mike Elias, for not even really, I don't think, making a genuine attempt to keep him. Of course, whether that makes, sense from a baseball perspective for the Orioles or not, that is up for debate. But yeah, it's going to be, um, I think it's tough for Oriole fans to watch him go. And then it does bring up other logistical issues about, well, how did the Orioles replace the 44 home runs that he hit? So obviously they signed Tyler O'Neill, and that's part of the solution. But more may be required than that. So in any case, yeah, Anthony Santander, best of luck moving forward. We're going to miss you. We will remember your contributions, and who knows, maybe the last year of his career or something, he'll sign a 1 year deal, come back. Who knows? Anyway, yeah. So thank you so much for listening to this a little bit somber episode of the Warehouse Podcast. Hopefully, Oriole fans will be able to remember Anthony Santander and all the positives for the Orioles that he brought. So, yeah, as I said, thank you so much for listening. Feel free to follow the show. Please give us a 5-star rating and review. We do have a YouTube channel. You can subscribe to us on YouTube. You can like this video on YouTube. Feel free to comment with your thoughts. If you want to get in touch with the show, please email us at thewarehousepod@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram and on Twitter at thewarehousepod. And thank you all so much for listening. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse, and go O's.